Hey guys, so this is the 16th update on my 2/5 scale Sherman M4A3E8. So I got the bullnose cowl done at the front here. How I did that is I used 3/8 wiggle board, that's what they call it. It's a bendable plywood, and all you have to do is you wet it. You wet both sides so they're like damp, and then you can bend it around the curves. And like this bullnose cowl, there's about a 5-inch radius. And as long as you wet it, you can bend it pretty easy. You can see I bent it all the way around here. That's all one piece. In here is a separate piece though. And I've got my towing hooks here. I made that out of 2-inch by 4-inch by 1/4-inch plate. And then this is 2 pieces V'd out and then welded together. And the outside's just 1/4-inch thick. It was tricky cutting those slots out in the wood because it's just trial and error. You gotta kind of draw a line and then trim a bit off and then trim a bit more until you get it fitting, and it seems to fit pretty good. There's no more than the 1/16 inch gap all the way around it. That turned out good. And then these side panels here, I tried doing them out of 1/2-inch plywood, non-bendable, but they have to have a slight curve to them, so I had to end up doing it with wiggle board. And these, that was definitely just trial and error. So you trim a little bit off and then trim a bit more, because in here that's got to sit flush. And then also on this outside panel I had to keep trimming a bit off because I cut it straight, and then just trim a bit more off till it fits good, and that turned out good. Same with the other side. And then I sanded this all so it's got a nice radius like the model there, or like the full-size one. But I still have to put a strip along here, like for bolts. You can see here, there's supposed to be a strip along there. I'll do that later. I got the machine gun mount in here. How I ended up doing that is I just use I think it's a 3.5-inch hole saw. It might be 3-inch, I can't remember. And then I had to drill a hole down straight and then angle the hole saw and then drill it in like that. And then these pieces are just made out of 1.5 inch, what is it, 2x4s. So made out of 2x4s, and I just cut them into shape, and then that's a 1/2 inch thick piece of plywood. That turned out good. And then here's these are the doors. This is just a strip of 1/2 inch plywood. I cut a circle out and glued it in there. And then that's to hold the doors in place so they don't fall through. There's a door there, there's a door here. They'll act as nice ventilation kind of thing. If it gets too hot, you can open the doors up. They're mainly for looks because you can't fit in there. And then this here, it's hard to pull out, but all the commander tanks with the M4 Sherman, the commander tanks had an antenna here, but the rest of the tanks just had a disc. So I put that disc in there. And I'm thinking about putting a water gun, hooking up a water gun in here. It'd be funny for spraying people. And it's simple to do, because all I have this is a fill cap here, and underneath I just put like a water tank, and then you run a hose from the bottom out to here with a valve, and then the top of it you pressurize it with air, because I got the air compressor, so it'll force the water down and out, and you get a constant spray, just for fun. And then I have to cut out, there's a hole I got to cut out here for an exhaust fan, or intake fan actually, because it's supposed to pull in fresh air here. And then there's going to be a vent at the back that the air blows out. Like you can see on the model here, there's the air intake, and then back here is the exhaust. And I got to build that little air intake so it comes up and looks good. So here's the turret. That took me a whole day just to cut out this top piece of plywood, the top of the turret, because what I had to do is I had to go from 2 reference points. So there's a reference point here. It's a little dot in the turret, and then I use this back piece as another reference point. And what I had to do was you take a vernier and measure from here over to like a point here, and then take another vernier and measure from there over to that point where the two lines intersect, and then you times that by 14, and then you measure from the same spot here and the same spot here, and then just run your tape measure over, or run two rulers actually, and then you'd mark it, and you do that every 4 inches. So it's like a big connect the dots thing, and then you just connect all the dots and then cut it out. Yeah, that took a day to do, but looks good now. And I think that's the easiest way to scale it up, unless I had like a whole bunch of paper and then I'd have to scan the tank and scale it up, but that worked good. And then on the side panels here, that's the 3/8 wiggle board, same stuff I used for the bullnose cowl. And then what I did was I had to frame up the whole inside of the turret. So around here is 2 inch by 2 inch by 8 inch long sections of wood. Had to do that all the way around the turret. So I have something to screw the side panels to. And so what I did, I clamped those pieces there and then traced it from underneath. And then those had to be cut on an angle, because you see these side panels here, they're on an angle, and it had to look authentic. I didn't want it to come straight down, it wouldn't look right. So those boards inside allow me something to screw these side panels to, and then the top side panels. And there's a couple uprights in here just for structure. And the back, it's done the same way. It's framed with 2x2. And then the whole thing was covered with wiggle board. And a lot of it I had to wet it to try and bend it. And these panels, these angled panels, were the hardest to do. Well, at the back was the worst, because it was just like trial and error. You had to set the piece on there and then trim a bit off, and then if that didn't fit, trim a bit more off, and keep doing that until they fit right. But they turned out pretty good. And then these little cracks, I'll just cover them with Bondo. So it looks pretty good. Took a while to do, but figured might as well do it right first time. And then here's the cupola I built. I had to make it oversized, because the original, and I had to offset it, because on the model here you can see the cupola is offset to the side, and of course you don't want the cupola offset with your head sticking up through here and it turning, because your head's going to get pushed off to one side, and that wouldn't be very good. And I also wouldn't fit through that, because you'd have to be a 2/5 scale person, and your hips would be like 8 inches wide, which mine aren't. So I ended up, this is 2/3 scale. So it's a fair bit oversized. The tank's 40% scale. This is 60%. So it looks not too bad. And it took me a whole week. Well, I had to go to school too, so that cuts into my time, but it took me a week to do this cupola here. And how I did it is, it's frame. I cut a couple discs here. I got a router jig for cutting circles, and I used my router and cut those circles, and then I had to use the bandsaw and cut this on a 45. Same at the top, I had to cut on a 45, and then in here I routed this down 1/4 of an inch. So there's a bit of a step to hold the cupola in place when it sits down. And then these are framed with 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch pine. And the outside of the cupola, it's covered with wiggle board. And that I had to put the panels on and then trace them, and then I had to cut these slots out so you could see through, and then I put plexiglass in there, or Lexan actually. And then these here, they're dummy screws. Because see on the model, I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's these little screws. They're made to bolt the cupola down. So I made those up. Here's the turret hatch. It's done kind of the same way. I had to cut a bunch of circles out with the router and then glue them all together. And then it's stepped down here so that sits in good. And then for this radius, I didn't have a 1-inch radius cutter. So what I ended up doing was I cut it on a 45 with a beveled router bit. Cut it on a 45, and then I used one of those flap wheels for the angle grinder, and that seemed to work really well for sanding it down because it takes it off fairly fast. And then back here you can see the hinge. That took a while to do. It's all out of, what's that, 1.1/8 thick pine, or no, 1.1/8 thick ash. So it's good and sturdy. And then I had to cut those all out on the bandsaw. And I got a 5/8 pin here, or a piece of dowel. So it works pretty good. And down here's a hinge, so the whole cupola lifts up. But I still have to build a lock here so the hatch doesn't flip open all the time. I'll put a latch here to keep it closed. And then you always open up the cupola to get anyways, because I can only fit my head through that hole. And then I got the turret drive, the switch for the turret drive hooked up. So I'll hop in and I'll show you it. So there's the one switch there. I used a rocker switch, and then this is a piece of 1-inch by 1-inch tubing and cut a rectangle out of it to mount that switch. And then I did the same with the gun elevation switch. I haven't wired that gun elevation switch up yet. I'll do that later. But yeah, so you can see the turret drive mechanism works pretty good. And then it's driven with that sprocket there. I had to cut out the old pedals. Here, let me open up the hatch doors at the front there. So I cut out the old pedals because first I wanted to get rid of the clutch pedals because I didn't need the clutches. There's the 2 brake pedals. I didn't need the clutch because I got hydrostatic drive. So I pulled those out, and then I found that those pedals flex too much when you put your foot on the brake. So I cut those out, and I'm gonna redo it. And I'm gonna mount those pedals up here on the, on that piece of 2-inch by 2-inch tubing. And then I'll put a panel over here to guard from the chains and stuff. So you get an extra like 6 inches leg room, which would be good. And then here's the gun. I'm working on it. Got a piece of 5/8 shaft here as a pivot for the gun. And then this is the same style gun as what's on my air cannon. I'll get out, show you it. So over here is my gun for the air cannon. I got a video on YouTube. I'll post a link to the test for that air cannon. So it's a rear breech load. So you put shells in there and then you close the door and lock it. And I was originally just gonna cut 4 inches off of this because this is 4 inches too long. I was gonna cut 4 inches out of it, but I decided I want to build a second gun anyways later on down the road because I want to have one for my air cannon and one for my tank. So I figured I'll just build a air cannon for the tank right now. And so this here, it's actually a bearing out of a Honda Civic. It's the outer race, and it fit just perfect. The 2-inch pipe fits just perfectly in it. So that's welded on here, and then that's a piece of jack post. And then I got a door here for the breech, and then I put a piece of conveyor belting behind that breech door to help seal the compressed air so it doesn't leak out around the back. So I still gotta finish the gun, and then I have to do my gun elevation. And how I'm gonna do that, I think I'm gonna use a 12 volt motor, and then I'm gonna run a bolt up here with an arm to a nut. So the motor spins the bolt, and then the nut moves up and down, which moves the gun up and down. So that'll be later. Could do that later. That's it for this update. Next update, I'll probably have the gun mantlet on, and I still gotta do the exhaust. That'll be later.